back to part three. Let's get into it. So, if you're on part three by this point, you kind of know what we do here. Um, I'm not going to be doing like a normal reaction video where I'm like ooh and ah and trying to be really like, I got a face for radio. So let's go back to what we do. I'm going to, you know, uh, try to facilitate this experience a little bit, digital learning experience or whatever. We're going to keep working through this century of self documentary. This next episode gets really interesting. A weird time period in psychological history, right? The 60s. We're kind of in the 60s now. And what I'm really trying to do with this series is I think it does a beautiful job talking about how some of these huge names, Freud, and in this episode, it's going to get a lot into this other name, Wilhelm Reich, and what Wilhelm Reich represented in this whole move towards this thing called the me generation, like ME, the me generation. All right. Without further ado, welcome back. I hope you enjoy this. I'm loving doing this. I was looking forward to this all day. My daughter just fell asleep. My wife, if you didn't know, my wife's like about 7 months or so pregnant right now. So she goes to bed pretty early. So my wife and daughter are asleep. I'm downstairs. I got a super-sized coffee, brand new, piping hot, and I got some water too somewhere right there. And let's get into this. Love doing this with you all, and I hope this course turns into a cool experience. I still got a lot of work to do. My goal is to have it cool and ready to go when you're ready to start. So, on that note, there's no time like the present. Let's get into this. Episode 3. Now, check out this. I'll just go back for one sec. Check out the title of this. There's a policeman inside all our heads. He must be destroyed. That's the subtitle of episode 3. Let's do it.
Don't settle for anything less than you can be.
Interesting. Don't settle for anything less than you can be. This is Anthony Robbins. You may know him as Tony Robbins. Like maybe the most famous motivational speaker of all time. But oh man, look at him here. He's so young. I actually kind of like this guy, to be honest. Like I would say in a way he had a positive influence on me because I remember seeing like videos and books of Tony Robbins. I think he went by Anthony Robbins back then, and finding him having like a kind of motivating, positive message. Maybe underestimating at the time myself, like the cultiness, not necessarily of him. I actually don't think it necessarily applies to him specifically, but like what I underestimated when I was, because this is like my exposure to this stuff's later. So like obviously in the 90s maybe. And I remember seeing a lot of this like stuff that was being marketed as new age or like parapsychology. And it's interesting how this stuff kind of fits now. So basically what I'm saying is I think a lot of people that are like this guy are pretty fake and pretty culty, but this guy specifically has a lot of redeeming qualities. A complex guy.
Make your life a masterpiece.
This is a series about how Sigmund Freud's ideas about the unconscious mind have been used by those in power to control the masses in an age of democracy. Last week's episode showed how Freud's ideas...
Quick shout out to Adam Curtis. Adam Curtis's YouTube channel. I think that he's being cool and let me use these, and I'm trying to use these in as fair use of a way as possible and really kind of highlight, because I really think that this adds to the course. This is like a key piece, right? Like I'm also at the same time I'm preparing a review of Freud's Civilization and Its Discontent. It's like this film, and you've heard me say this before, and I'll say it maybe once per time, but like it's the combination of his excellent narration and insights plus footage of actual interviews with the actual people and their family members, and then just really intense archival footage. that highlights and complements a lot of his points. So Adam Curtis. I'd also like to say, like, for some of the things that you might do as some of your future assignments, to pay attention to how he story tells, right? Like, I want to try to, with some of the stuff in this course, kind of move a little bit beyond just like you telling me about something like like a traditional paper or presentation, and that's all fine. But like, the storytelling piece is important. Human beings interpret their experience in story format, and the better we get at that, it's like the more powerful you can be in expressing the important idea that you have, right?
Ideas spread throughout America in the 1950s. They were promoted by his daughter Anna and by Freud's nephew, Edward Bernays, who invented public relations. He brought Freud's theories into the heart of advertising and marketing.
A man like you, I mean, with a car like this.
What they both believed was that underneath...
But see, like, notice, it's laughable. People will look at that two ways, right? Some of you might not have laughed there. Some of you might have been annoyed by that. And it's like, it's interesting though, either type of reaction is sort of the same reaction of like, wow, that seems out of place and dated. But what I want to show with that isn't the point I'm trying to make here is like, notice how that car commercial or whatever isn't about the engine. It's not about fuel economy. It's not about how well the tires perform. It's about, hey, that girl that's attractive might think you're cool. And notice how that's an intentional, very differently aimed scheme, marketing scheme, public relations angle, whatever you want to call it.
For human beings was a hidden, irrational self, which needed to be controlled, both for the good of individuals and the stability of society. But the Freuds were about to be toppled from power by opponents who said they were wrong about human nature. The inner self did not need to be repressed and controlled. It should be encouraged to express itself. Out of this would come a new type of strong human being and a better society. But what in fact emerged from this revolution was the very opposite. An isolated, vulnerable, and above all greedy self, far more open to manipulation by both business and politics than anything that had gone before. Those in power would now control the self, not by repressing it, but by feeding its infinite desires.
What goes on here is the liberation of feeling. In other words, feelings, not just memories, that have been suppressed. For example, screaming, crying, anger. You get a person who's really angry, and they're going to let it out. No! No! I could kill you! I'm an old man. Listen, I can't get all the strength into this that young people would get if they had those feelings. That wasn't bad.
In the 1950s, a small group of renegade psychoanalysts began a new form of therapy. They worked in small rooms in New York City and encouraged their patients to express their feelings openly.
I want help. I do. I want help.
It was a direct attack on the ideas of the Freudian psychoanalysts, who had become rich and powerful, teaching Americans how to control their feelings.
In Freud's work, you see, they were afraid of the feelings. They believed that what they wanted was contained people, very proper, doing the right thing and living a proper life. That's what they wanted, but not an intense emotional life. Freud wasn't emotional himself. I mean, he's an intellect, Freud. I was an intellect too, I know, but I'm also more than that now.
The leader of this group was a man hated by Freud and his family. He was called Wilhelm Reich. Reich lived an isolated life in a house he had built for himself in remote mountains near the Canadian border.
Another guy, like, this is why I love this Adam Curtis filmmaker guy so much, is like, he just goes, in my opinion, he just goes from interesting topic to interesting topic, and each connection's more interesting. Like, you can tie in a more interesting person, Wilhelm Reich. So Wilhelm Reich, this other, like, the students in my that have taken classes with me, you've heard me refer to him as another giant of psychology, and it's interesting to think that, like, they just used the term hated each other, him and the Freuds.
Reich originally had been a devoted disciple of Freud's in Vienna in the 1920s.
Yeah.
But he had challenged Freud over the fundamental basis of psychoanalysis.
See, like, this is the thing that people don't give Freud credit for, right? Like, people are so quick to critique any piece about Freud, but they don't realize that, like, the whole, almost basically the entire field of psychology is basically Freud having these revolutionary ideas, and then all these other smart people being like, okay, well, that makes sense, but what about this? And, like, challenging on all these different areas. And people understand that theoretically, but it's interesting to think that, like, Freud was also, like, a real person that was a charismatic, powerful social person. And so, like, there's also all these complicatedly webbed relationships, whether we're talking about Carl Jung, whether we're talking about his daughter Anna Freud, or Erik Erikson, or Sabina Spellrein. Incredibly fascinating, because she's somebody that there was sexual attraction there with Freud and with Carl Jung, and, like, so, and Freud also considered her, you might have heard me say this before, but, like, an intellectual equal of those two guys, right? So if you view Freud and his prize student Jung, and Freud considered Sabina Spellrein as, like, on their level. She told him an idea once at a party that blew Freud's mind so much that it made him rethink his understanding of the structure of the psyche and create this idea called Thanatos, or the death instinct. Right? So if people ever call Freud sexist, like, that's an important thing to remember. He pushed Sabina Spellrein as an equal, at least theoretically, and I think, like, that's something that's easy to miss. Freud's impact is, it's like it's like they say that philosophy is like footnote. It's Plato and footnotes to Plato. It's like psychology is Freud and footnotes to Freud. Wilhelm Reich's a significant footnote, to use that metaphor. And again, I'm being, like, a bit overly dramatic, but I'm just trying to not be boring and make these interesting, right? But also, I'm not being that dramatic. Freud is that footnotes. I do believe that thing I just said.
Freud argued that
Wilhelm
at
Reich.
heart, human beings were still driven by primitive animal instincts. The job of society was to repress and control these dangerous forces. Reich believed the complete opposite. The unconscious forces inside the human mind, he said, were good. It was their repression by society that distorted them. That was what made people dangerous.
Reich and Freud had two fundamentally differing views about what was essential human nature. At its core, Freud saw an uncontrolled, violent, warlike, raging inferno of emotions. Reich said these things are not the way human beings are originally destined to be. They're the result of not permitting the original impulse to express itself.
The underlying
Okay, so he's saying, like, we got to see where this is conceptually and theoretically going, right? Because where Reich is about to go is to say, like, well, if this neurosis or this psychological distress is being caused by this internal turmoil that's being suppressed and repressed, then the logical next step is, well, then we need to express it. So you're about to see the emergence of all these, like, well, kind of some of the footage in this is a little bit embarrassing to show because it's like, it's this weird, I said it last time, I don't know a better way to say it than just this weird time in psychology where there's a lot of, like I put that person's name up before, like Luen, like the experimental psychology, where it's like we're gonna try all these different things that got like really close to what you would consider almost like drama class or theater. Like play this out. There's actually like methods called dramaturgical, like the word drama, and then like turgil, or it's like I might have spelled that a little bit wrong, but you get in the area dramaturgical therapy. I actually remember when I was doing my bachelor of social work way back in the day, doing seminars. This was actually a really cool experience I had. I got to do. I was working doing my bachelor of social work. My placement was at accessibility services at University of Waterloo, and I worked in the tech lab, and I taught. I would work with people that were visually impaired, and teach them. Basically, back then it was teaching them Dragon Natural Speak, which was just like software that allowed you to go speech to text. And I also taught Kurzweil, which was something that helped them have their textbooks read to them. Anyways, that's all side piece to say that, oh yeah, I almost lost my train there, but I got it. That when I was doing that part of my placement or whatever, I got the opportunity to go to this thing because the accessibility and counseling are right beside each other, and there's master's students in the counseling doing their placement there. And so part of their training was they were doing this thing where every week a counselor that did a different kind of therapy would come in and talk for an hour about it and then actually demonstrate. And I got to go to this, and it was like 15 weeks or something, and it was like every different style. I don't know, it's like it was almost like a senior's honors essay on techniques where, like, say you come in one week and we're like, this week we're doing Carl Rogers and we're all focused on like therapeutic rapport, and then the next week we're like, okay, this week we're doing Carl Jung and we're focused on like dream analysis, and then the next week we're like, okay, now we're doing Viktor Frankl. This is kind of what I'm doing with this class, but yeah, the whole point of this incredibly long rant was to say that this was like a style, this dramaturgical, or I keep saying the word wrong, but it's basically the word drama, like drama class, as a therapeutic expression, a cathartic type of therapeutic intervention.
Natural impulse, Reich argued, was the libido, sexual energy.
Sorry, you guys are like, you're all probably like, can you ever finish that point? But yeah, the libido. So this idea that there's this, like, the same idea that Freud had. So notice it's like they're so quick to just rip on Freud, but they're also so quick to just say, like, I'll take 95% of that, and then I'll just act like I dismiss you over this 5. But we'll take the libido and the unconscious and these competing impulses and that there's psychological complexes, and I'll take all that piece of your theory and just pretend like that's not a total take of your theory.
If this were released, then human beings would flourish. But this idea brought him into direct conflict not only with Sigmund Freud, but Freud's daughter Anna, who believed that the sexual forces in humans were dangerous if not controlled.
My father thought that you should liberate the libido and have freedom, and he developed a theory rather early that neuroses were due to lack of good orgasm, or any orgasm. And that was, Anna Freud, was a virgin. I mean, this is very important because she never had a sexual relation with a man. And here was this man preaching that the way to health was through orgasm. And here was this woman who had been analyzed by her father because she was masturbating.
So okay, so think about this. I don't know how to comment on just what she just said, but think about this. It's like, whoa, Wilhelm Reich's making this point. Think of Wilhelm Reich as like writing in this time of like this about to emerge kind of hippie culture and this like free love and like expression and like sexuality is like therapeutic or all this kind of stuff. And Anna Freud's like this, like, well, she's almost fighting for traditional psychoanalysis. But also keep in mind, both of these people, absolute intellectual giants.
Here's this woman who's opposed to sexuality, really, and here's this man who's preaching sexual freedom. I mean, there was bound to be a clash, wasn't there?
The conflict came to a head at a conference in 1934 in Switzerland.
Oh, look how unpleased she looks.
Anna Freud, who had by now become the acknowledged leader of the psychoanalytic movement, forced Wilhelm Reich out. She destroyed his career.
She got rid of him, very definitely. And I guess part of what I'm doing is getting rid of her.
Explain.
Well, I think that Anna Freud shouldn't get away with what she did.
And it's interesting, right? Because like, and what I'm trying to do is say it's yin yang. It's like they both. Freud and Anna Freud had a right to be upset with everybody, and everybody had. It's like it's so easy to underestimate the human aspect of this, right? And that if you're the Freuds, you're thinking people are stealing our ideas, repackaging it. It's interesting, right? That now we think of psychology. It's like it's not the one person's idea. It's like, hang on, it kind of was. It's not just Freud, no, but it's easy to forget.
It should be known. Maneuvering to get him kicked out of the International Psychoanalytic Association.
But Anna Freud did do this.
So you're taking revenge?
You might say so, right? Or wronging a right? No, righting a wrong. You better cut that one out.
Isn't that called a Freudian slip?
Yes, it is.
Reich fled to the United States and built his home and a laboratory. His ideas became grandiose to the point of madness. He was convinced that he had discovered the source of libidinal energy. He called it orgone energy, and Reich built a giant gun, which he said could capture this energy from the atmosphere and concentrate it onto clouds to produce rain. He also said that the gun could be used to destroy UFOs, which threatened the future of the world. In 1956, Reich was arrested.
Right, so like an interesting guy. Wilhelm Reich was... But again, a lot of these giants, like when I keep using this term, but a lot of because it's a reference back to the one assignment that my students did, right? That a lot of you did, the Giants of Psychology, where we had I have made that list of like 40 people or whatever. And so many of them are complicated people. It's not like they're all like, they're giants because of their theoretical contribution. And well, not always. I guess someone like, well, Rogers has massive theoretical contribution, but his is also very practical. But it's like they're not angels. They're highly complicated people.
By the federal authorities for selling a device that he said used orgone energy to cure cancer. Reich was treated as a madman. He was imprisoned, and all his books and papers burnt on the order of the court. A year later, Reich died in prison.
Look at that. Think about that. That's a weird connection. For as much as they might have hated each other, both of their books got burned. So is that not so symbolic of what's wrong with so many things? They're supposed to be the two opposite sides, and just different people burn their books. And if you're going to be in a scenario where you're burning books, it's just a matter of time until the side burning the book switches, and then that's why you can't burn books.
To the Freudians, it seemed as if their main threat had been removed forever. But they were wrong. What the Freudians didn't realize was that their influence in American society was also about to be challenged, and in a way that would lead not only to their decline, but to the dramatic resurgence of Reich's ideas in America and throughout the capitalist world.
The consumer is king. His whim makes or unmakes manufacturers,
Too early with
wholesalers,
that
and
one.
retailers. Whoever wins his confidence wins the game. Whoever loses his confidence is lost.
By the late 50s, psychoanalysis had become deeply involved in driving consumerism in America. Most advertising companies employed psychoanalysts, and as last week's episode showed, they had created new ways to understand consumers' motives, above all with the focus group, in which consumers free associated their feelings about products. Out of this came new ways.
Now remember, like, I'm going to pause this a million times, so I almost apologize for pausing it, but it's just my nature. Psychoanalyst and consumer motives, and it's like this whole idea of advertising and aiming everything at the irrational. It's so interesting, and now we're gonna see how this flips and how this kind of transforms as we move forward
To
historically.
market products by appealing to the hidden unconscious desires of the consumer.
Neutral stimulus.
Memorability.
Sheer deception.
Great. Tilt-away steering wheel.
A dream thing, the mistress.
Something intimate is going on.
But in the early 60s, a new generation emerged who attacked this. They accused American business of using psychological techniques to manipulate people's feelings and turn them into ideal consumers.
Advertising was manipulation. It was a way to get you to do something that didn't come out of you. It came out of somebody else. Somebody else said, this year you should be wearing powder pink shirts with matching powder pink buck shoes. And I said, why? That's not who I am. That's who somebody else is. They wanted you to be somebody who would buy their stuff. This whole feeling of being somebody else's tool. I don't want to be that. I don't want to be somebody else's man. I want to be me.
In the mid-60s, a protest movement began on America's campuses. One of the students' main targets was corporate America. They accused the corporations of brainwashing the American public. Consumerism was not just a way of making money, it had become the means of keeping the masses docile, while allowing the government to pursue a violent and illegal war in Vietnam. The student's mentor was a famous radical philosopher called Herbert Marcuse. Marcuse had studied psychoanalysis and was a fierce critic of the Freudians. They had, he said, helped to create a world in which people were reduced to expressing their feelings and identities through mass-produced objects. It resulted in what he called one-dimensional man, conformist and repressed. The psychoanalysts had become the corrupt agents of those who ruled America.
It was one of the most striking phenomena to see to what extent the ruling power structure could manipulate, manage and control not only the consciousness but also the subconscious and unconscious of the individuals. And this took place on a psychological basis by the controls and the manipulation of the unconscious primary drives which Freud stipulated.
Think about it, dear American people out there.
You hear him, Hal?
You're all brainwashed, kiddies. You're all brainwashed. That's why you're here. They're saying right now, kill the bum. Look, I look at you in the living room. You know, you're saying, kill me.
Following the logic of Marcuse's argument, the new student left set out to attack this system of social control. It was summed up in the slogan, "There is a policeman inside all our heads. He must be destroyed." And that policeman was going to be destroyed by overthrowing the state and the corporations that had put him there. One group, the Weathermen, began a series of bomb attacks on companies.
So this is the birth of not critical thinking, but critical theory. Right? So this is Marcuse This is the Frankfurt School. And so, and this is heavily situated in, I guess you could call it cultural Leninism. Marcuse and the student left. But anyways, Adam Moore's, this is like kind of where this is getting political, obviously, right? And so it's like how these understandings of mind interact with this, because obviously, what's politics? It's about, well, according to this psychoanalytic approach, it's about, is it about keeping the masses docile? That's what I just put up on the screen. Is it about this idea of individualism? Is it about this idea of the herd and the crowd? What is the self? And that's kind of the point of this whole documentary series. This is the century of self, right?
That they said both controlled people's minds through consumer products and made the weapons being used in Vietnam.
There's no way to
end this at the time of the Vietnam War.
Be committed to nonviolence in the middle of the most violent society that history's ever created. I'm not committed to nonviolence in any way.
We want to live a life that isn't based on materialistic values, and yet the whole system of government and the economy of America is based on profit, on personal greed and selfishness. So that in order to be human, in order to love each other and be equal with each other and not place each other in roles, we have to destroy the kind of government that keeps us from asserting our positive values of life.
But the American state fought back violently. At the Democratic Convention in Chicago in 1968, the police and the National Guard were unleashed to attack thousands of demonstrators. It was the start of a phase of ruthless repression of the New Left in America. It culminated in the killing of 4 students at Kent State University 18 months later. In the face of this, the left began to fall apart.
We had met the force of the state. It was
So one sec, I just wanted to say, so the Weatherman is one of the first examples in the, sorry, I keep kicking the table, but one of the first examples of the states of this kind of extreme environmental activism that, depending on who you're talking to, right? Like the activists are calling it activism. The authorities are calling it eco-terror. Yeah, the Weatherman. There's a really good documentary called If a Tree Falls that you could find on YouTube that's about that group. And then now they're talking about the Kent State incident.
Much bigger and stronger and more powerful than we realized. And at that point, what seemed to happen was that there was a change in tactics.
Confronted by this violent repression, many in the New Left began to turn to a new idea. If it was impossible to get the policeman out of one's head by overthrowing the state, instead one should find a way of getting inside one's own mind and removing the controls implanted there by the state and the corporations. Out of this would come a new self, and thus a new society.
People who had been politically active were persuaded that if they could change themselves and be healthy individuals, and if a movement grew up just aimed at people changing themselves, then at some point, all that positive change going on, well, you could say
Sorry, I pressed the wrong button and zoomed in on my face, but did you see that? It said the founding member of the Yippie Party. Okay. Just for everybody's sake here, let's look this up. What is the Yippie Party here? The Youth International Party, whose members were commonly called Yippies, was an American youth-oriented radical countercultural revolutionary offshoot of the free speech anti-war movement of the late 60s. That's about exactly what you would expect based on who this guy is and when he's talking and everything. That makes total sense.
He would become quality, and there would be a sort of a spontaneous transformation of society. But political activism was not required.
It's about making a new you that if enough people changed the way they were, that the society would change.
So the personal became political.
Yes, the personal became political. Without changing the personal, you didn't stand a chance of changing the political. Coming up against the state power of the United States was not an option. I mean, they outgunned us.
And to produce the new self, they turned to the ideas and techniques of Wilhelm Reich. Since his death, a small group of psychotherapists have been developing techniques based on Reich's ideas. Their aim was to invent ways that would allow individuals to free themselves from the controls implanted in their minds by society. Their center was a tiny old motel on the remote coast of California. It was called the Esalen Institute. The dominant figure at Esalen was a psychoanalyst called Fritz Perls. Perls had been trained by Reich and had developed a form of group in...
Man, this... Okay, wait. I'll get this name for you. Fritz Perls. Gestalt therapy. I should have wrote that too. Let me just get that for you here. This guy was on our list of giants of psychology too. Fritz Perls. Another weird guy though. Yes. Sorry, I know you can't see me typing these. Gestalt therapy. Yeah, so Gestalt. I spelled that wrong. Sorry. Gestalt. Oh man, I'm not good with other languages. Let me just Gestalt. Probably gonna show it on the screen. I think it's like this. You might have to look it up. It's a German word that means like a Gestalt means like a full picture, that you can't just look at people's emotions and their thoughts and as these like compartmentalized pieces. You have to look at the full person. And this is Fritz Perls' idea. I should have just left it with that instead of struggling. If this was like not live, I would totally edit out that last couple minutes, but I apologize. You got to bear with me because I'm trying to one-shot this. So, yeah, let's just pretend that it just went Fritz Perls and then went right back to the clip. Love you guys and girls. This is an awesome class. I hope that, yeah, anyways, back to the show.
Counter, in which he pushed individuals to publicly express the feelings inside them that society had said were dangerous and should be repressed.
It's a basic fear of that thing.
I gotta point out, look at it. It's just, I can't get over how, and all this old footage, like imagine this guy's just like running this group, just having a cigarette the whole time. He's like, no one thinks anything of it. All the old like psychologists, you see them like talking to people. They always have their pipes and stuff. It's just in 2021, it seems just so interesting that it's just such a part of like philosophical discussion in the very recent academic past. I can remember professors smoking in their offices. Like that's how recent. So that would be like around the turn of 2000. Maybe late 90s. And yeah, and that would have been when it was like getting near the end, right? But
inside me, like a little demon in there. It doesn't come out very often. It's really hard to get it out.
Now put the thing inside you on that chair and talk to it.
Perls used to call this getting on the hot seat in front of a group. If this were the hot seat and you were Perls and you...
Michael Murphy, oh my God. Gosh, sorry. Michael Murphy and George Leonard wrote this book called The Life We Were Given. It's what Adam Curtis, the documentary filmmaker of this here, does so well is pull everything together. Like George Leonard and Michael Murphy yeah, were the founders of the Esalen Institute. It's so interesting to see how, and then Fritz Perls was a student of Wilhelm Reich, so that's how they're both there. George Leonard was also, I think it was George Leonard, not Murphy, one of those two. So those two are like partners or whatever. I think they eventually had a falling out. One of them was really big into martial arts. I think Leonard was into Aikido, and then maybe they're about to talk about this, which is a Japanese martial art made famous by Steven Seagal. If anyone grew up watching martial art movies like I did. So yeah, anyways, I just got lost on the sidetrack because they're just quoting Michael Murphy, who's like just a really random, not random at all, but like a really interesting. I didn't really catch that. Like, I've read books by this guy, and I didn't really realize his connection to Fritz Perls, although I should have noticed. That's the thing that's so kind of neat, and I'm trying to highlight here is like that these people knew each other. It was like there's personal relationships that influence the history of psychology.
Would guide me into this process of self-enactment, self-revelation.
Oh yeah, but what I was going to say is notice how that was like, put your anxiety there on the chair and talk to it. There's this like drama class almost aspect of acting it out.
Of staying present to all the parts of yourself and noticing it, and then taking ownership of this.
As the demon.
Yeah.
Yes, I can come out. I can come right out of him, and I can push him aside.
You, say you.
I can push you aside.
Yeah. Be the demon with each one of us.
I can make you all cry. I can make you all feel terrible. Maybe even forever. I can make this mouth here, do things and say things. I can almost destroy anyone, each one of you, if I get out. There isn't one of you that I would spare. Not even you.
Yeah. How do you feel now?
I feel better. I feel very honest.
Yeah. And you notice the increase of power.
In other words, taking ownership of who you are and how you act and how you feel. Your whole being in the world. In other words, giving you autonomy, owning your freedom.
I'm frightening. When I have my power, I am frightening.
Say, I frighten you with my power.
I frighten you with my power.
Now, where do you feel your power? In your hands? In your muscles? Where else?
Wake up! I won't let you for me! God damn you!
Okay. Stop it.
You. It was not phony movement. That's what I wanted to do, and I did it.
What Perls and others working at Esalen believed was that they were creating ways that allowed individuals to express their true inner selves.
I want them to applaud for me.
Out of this, they believed, would come new autonomous beings free of social conditioning. To the left, defeated in the wake of Chicago, it was an enormously attractive idea. These techniques could be used to unleash a new, powerful self, strong enough to overthrow the old order.
They're doing like Tai Chi or something. Not real Tai Chi, but...
In the late 60s and early 70s, thousands flocked to Esalen. Only a few years before, it had been an obscure fringe institute. Now it became the centre of a national movement for personal transformation. The human...
So now, sorry, I cut him off. You saying that... the human potential movement. And now, it's so interesting in hindsight Like, I remember reading about this and not with the footage and even just with the music that Curtis uses, it's easy to see the cultness to this. Um, and keep in mind, like this is the '60s, right? This is like, yeah, and I think this is now maybe moving into the '70s, but this whole idea of like maximizing human potential and doing it through these like development of self through becoming, I just put up like free autonomous beings, meaning basically like moving autonomous, meaning like doing what you want because you want, when you want, how you want, like moving beyond conditioning. Basically, it's the opposite of being conditioned. So, and this is happening also. Keep in mind, like this is like the kind of hippiest part of California in the '60s at this El Slane Institute.
Potential movement.
So it became magnetic. People wanted to join this stream of exploration. Within 7 or 8 years, there were about 200 of these centers in America, looking mainly to Esalen for the leadership.
I feel so liberated.
Really? It's fantastic.
And it took on a big political agenda. You could not separate personal transformation from social transformation. The two go together.
As the movement grew, the leaders of Esalen decided to try and use their techniques to solve social problems. They began with racism. They organized an encounter group for white and black radicals. Both groups would be encouraged to express their inner racist feelings which had been instilled in them by society. By doing this, they would transcend those feelings and encounter each other as individuals.
I don't think there's any vulgar language here. I don't know, I'm trying to be sensitive. I don't think there is. But I don't know. I think it's okay. But I always get nervous when they show these encounter group stuff on any topic, and this one's going to be related to race. So I'm going to play it, but we'll see.
I started a series of encounters called Racial Confrontation as Transcendental Experience. We thought that we wanted to get that kind of black-white confrontation.
Here's George
so
Leonard.
you could really get down to see what was between the two races, not by backing off and trying to be polite, but by going right into the belly of the beast, of this beast of racial prejudice. And these were extremely dramatic. These were the toughest workshops ever convened at Esalen Institute.
I'm looking at you, Whitey. You got clothes on. You got shoes on.
You're so sure looking at me, huh?
You got the goddamn police in the neighborhood.
Really? They're not my police.
You got a governor. You got a mayor.
Oh, really?
You got the president. You got ambassadors.
You can vote, too.
You got jets in Vietnam. That's the benefits of slave labor. You got building skyscrapers that you dominate and control economically and politically. And tell me that it's not yours.
It's yours, too.
Then the blacks all got together and attacked the whites. And they just let us have it. What they call it was peeping somebody. Peeping somebody means peeping into their secrets, into their phoniness and so forth. Like the white liberal. Oh, they really got onto the white liberal, you know.
So don't give me no shit about I'm free. You're a goddamn liar, you white pink son of a bitch, you. Yeah, I want to know what you came down here for. You want a black buck, huh?
Yeah.
You looking for a stud? Huh? Well, what did you come here for? You're sitting there with your legs all gap wide open showing your drawers. Now what did you come here for?
The black-white encounter groups were a disaster. The black radicals saw it as an insidious attempt to destroy their power. By trying to turn them into liberated individuals, Esalen was removing the one thing that gave them power and confidence in their struggle against racism, their collective identity as blacks.
For my reason. For your reason. Now dig this. Your reason for being here is different from my reason.
So the Human Potential Movement turned to another social group who they believed would benefit from personal transformation. Nuns. And this time they were more successful. The convent of...
I forgot about this twist. I bet you didn't see that twist coming. That's so interesting. Like, what a... See, this is what I'm saying. This Century of Self, like this Adam Curtis guy, does an amazing job at like showing he's a puzzle maker. He's a puzzle completer. He's a puzzle. That's not a good metaphor, but he's taking these highly complex people, highly complex things, and just seamlessly threading them all together and showing that they're actually connected. These things are connected in a really deep, interesting way. So now we're going to see how this connects with the sisterhood.
The Immaculate Heart in Los Angeles was one of the largest seminaries in America. A group of radical psychotherapists approached the convent. They wanted to try out their techniques for personal liberation on individuals whose identities were defined by a series of external rules which they had deeply internalized. The convent, anxious to appear modern, agreed to the experiment.
And we did weekend encounter workshops for several hundred Immaculate Heart nuns. Nuns who were reserved, and they tended to be more reserved than other normal people, were told, don't be so reserved, let it all out. You're a good person, you can afford.
Just think about that. Life's short. You have to be able to smile sometimes. It's interesting that they're running encounter groups with nuns. So the idea is to like, well, just think like, well, I wonder if they're actually going to show footage here. I kind of forget this piece, but like, it's interesting. Like, talk about, because obviously a nun's trying to live a very, well, religious life. And then if these encounter groups where they're really trying to say, like, they're trying to do this quote unquote shadow work of like, you know, what's your darkest thought? Now let's make that into a person. Now talk to that person. It's like, talk about something that's not a normal practice for nuns.
Or to be who you really are. You don't need to play the role of a nun. You don't need to keep downcast eyes. And prudence is an oversold virtue.
Prudence.
You're trying to.
That's the word I was looking for before. Prudence. Prudence is like what you'd think of as a nun, like properness, but almost in like a religious sense.
Assert yourself, trying to find out who you are, who you're becoming. At the same time, you're trying to live a life of dedication, of service, and you're trying to make all these things fit into who you are, and you're just, you know, it's such a turmoil at times that you just blow a gasket and do silly, crazy things, you know. Running around the orchard and stealing oranges and taking Cokes out of the refrigerator and crazy things.
I felt like I was being a hypocrite, and I wanted people to respect me for what I was, not for what I was wearing. And so I'm glad for the change.
You feel frightened, but you'll go on.
Oh yeah, I'm scared to death, but it's worth it.
The experiment began to transform the convent. The nuns voted to discard their habits in favor of ordinary clothes. But the psychotherapists found they had awoken other forces.
Solid.
One of the things we unleashed was sexual energy, the kind of thing that the church had been very good at restraining was no longer to be restrained. One sister who was a member of the community, she got the idea that she could be freer than she had been before, and she seduced one of her classmates and then seduced the mistress of novices, who was an older woman, very reserved, and her program of freeing this older woman was sexual.
That's so interesting, right? Like I guess it's a really effective way of hiding who the person is, but it just seems like I don't know, just black out the eyes. Yeah, so it's like that. Talk about like what he's saying here, like that there's this one woman that like had this experience, and then it like kind of opened her up to this new thing, and then she like kind of had this influence on other people, and it all kind of went through. It's like that would be such an interesting show, or like a documentary about that person's experience would be interesting because of, well, encounter workshops with nuns, I guess you're going to have some interesting results. It's a weird idea.
She drove her to the store, and when they drove back and drove into the garage, she leaned over and gave her a big kiss on the lips. And thereafter, sister, who had perhaps never been kissed before, was ready for more.
The effect of the experiment on the convent was cataclysmic. Within a year, 300 nuns, more than half the convent, petitioned the Vatican to be released from their vows. And 6 months later, the convent closed its doors. All that was left was a small group of nuns, but they had become radical lesbian nuns. The rest gave up the religious life. They gave up being nuns?
They did, yeah, they became persons.
Persons.
By the late 60s, the idea of self-exploration was spreading rapidly in America. Encounter groups became the center of what was seen as a radical alternative culture based on the development of the self, free of a corrupt capitalist culture.
We just want the freedom to be ourselves, and that's for love, for experience, positive way of life. We don't say that you're wrong. We just want to be free to be what we want to be, or what we find ourselves to be, as we continue to search ourselves.
And it was beginning to have a serious effect on corporate America, because these new selves were not behaving as predictable consumers. The life insurance industry in particular was concerned that fewer and fewer college students were buying life insurance when they left university. They asked Daniel Yankelovich, America's leading market researcher, to investigate. He had studied psychoanalysis.
The life insurance business, more than any other business at the time, was built on the Protestant ethic. You only bought life insurance if you were a person who sacrificed for the future. If you lived in the present, you had no need for life insurance. So they had some sense that maybe the sort of core values of the Protestant ethic were being challenged by some of these new values that were beginning to appear. And I was really...
Think about that. Like, talk about pulling in interesting side things. He's saying, like, one of the parts of corporate America that started pushing back against this counterculture first was actually the life insurance business, because they started noticing this change in people from this Protestant work ethic, or this idea of like, how to quickly explain the Protestant work ethic, like this idea of manifest destiny, that the American dream of like having your own, working hard and eventually getting a job, and then having a family and maybe having a homestead that you protect and take care of. It's like, and that was somehow living the good life, right? That fit within their understanding of religion. That's why it was Protestant, the Protestant work ethic, that religion and work ethic are connected, and that was a key part of the kind of establishment of modern America or whatever. And it's like, now that's getting divorced or whatever, and it's interesting that corporate America is seeing that in the life insurance. It's just weird. You wouldn't think that this video was about to talk about the life insurance industry.
Astonished at what I found. The conventional interpretation, the dominant interpretation, was that it had to do with political radicalism. But, it was clear to us that was a mask, a cover. The core of it had to do with self-expressiveness. That this preoccupation with the self and the inner self, that was what was so important to people. The ability to be self-expressive.
Wow, what a feeling! 300 miles to go. What a out of sight.
Yankelovich began to track the growth and behavior of these new expressive selves. What he told the corporations was that these new beings were consumers, but they no longer wanted anything that would place them within the narrow strata of American society. Instead, what they wanted were products that would express their individuality, their difference in a conformist world, the very things that US corporations did not make.
Products have always had an emotional meaning. What was new was individuality. The idea that this product expresses me, and whether it was a small European car, the particular music system,
Relaxing.
your presentation of self, your clothing.
That's weird.
Immediate energy from our muscles and relaxing.
These become ways in which people can spend their money in order to say to the world who they are. But the manufacturers, they had no idea of what was going on really with consumers and in the market at large.
Major advertising companies set up what they called operating groups to try and work out how to appeal to these new individuals. The head of one agency sent a memo to all staff. We must conform, he told them, to the new nonconformists. We must listen to the music of Bobby Dylan and go to the theatre more. But the problem was, few of the self-expressive individuals would take part in focus groups. The advertisers were left to their own devices.
There's a new cereal that tastes so right. Makes you dance, it's a way out of sight. It's tasty little squares of malted wheat. It's crispy and it's crunchy and it tastes so neat. Faster though.
That's what I'm saying. Use a folk rock with more rock than folk.
We need folk rock with more rock than folk. It's like you see, you might be noticing the birth of, well, here comes advertising.
There was an even more serious problem. To make products for people who wanted to express themselves would mean creating variety. But the systems of mass production that had been developed in America were only profitable if they made large numbers of the same objects. This had fitted perfectly with the limited range of desires of a conformist society. The expressive self threatened this whole system of manufacture. And the threat was about to grow rapidly.
Go!
Because an entrepreneur had invented a way of mass-producing this new independent self. He was called Werner Erhard.
Some of the stuff that we traditionally think of as being in your mind is actually in the world, because you're moving to that too.
Erhard had invented a system called EST, Erhard Seminar Training. Hundreds of people came for weekend sessions to be taught how to be themselves.
EST.
And EST was soon copied by other groups, like Exegesis in Britain. Many of Erhard's techniques came from the human potential movement, but he criticized the movement for not having gone far enough. Their idea that there was a central core inside all human beings was, he said, just another limitation on human freedom. In reality, there was no fixed self, which meant that you could be anything that you wanted to be.
The thesis of the human potential movement was that there was something really good down in there. And if you took these layers off, what you were going to wind up with was a kernel, a something that was innately self-expressive, that was the true self, that was going to be a wonderful thing. In actuality, you found people who'd gone to the last layer and took off the last layer and found that what was left was nothing.
All right, push! Move! Do it!
The EST sessions were intense and often brutal. The participants signed contracts agreeing not to leave and to allow the trainers to do anything they thought necessary to break down their socially constructed identities.
You're gonna get sandwiched in there. Go for a win! If I push harder than you do, I'm gonna squash you. So you better push fast. Now, hard, do it! That's it, do it again! Push! Good! 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 Again! Yes!
The real point to the EST training was to go down through layer after layer after layer after layer until you got to the last layer and peeled it off, where the recognition was that it's really all meaningless and empty. Now, that's existentialism's endpoint. EST went a step further in that people began to recognize that it was not only meaningless and empty, but it was empty and meaningless that it was empty and meaningless. And in that, there's an enormous freedom. All the constrictions, all of the rules you've placed on yourself are gone. And what you're left with...
So you're saying it's is this philosophy that it's meaningless and it's meaningless and it's meaningless and it's free. You can see how it's like, it's kind of snake oil.
Is nothing. And nothing is an extraordinarily powerful place to stand, because it is only from nothing that you can create. And from this nothing, people were able to invent a life, and allowing them to create themselves. Invent themselves. You can be what you want to be.
I want you to start to make that sound, and on that sound, create and people the world the way you want to create it.
What Earhart did was to say that only the individual matters, that there is no societal concern, that you living a fulfilled life is all you need be concerned about. Est people came out of those trainings feeling that it wasn't selfish to think about yourself, it was your highest duty.
So kiss me and smile for me, tell me that you'll wait for me, hold me like you'll never let me go.
The training is 2 weekends, and it was quite an incredible experience in my life. I'll forever be grateful for the experience. I got a great deal out of it. We really want to know who we are. There are things going on. We learn more and more about ourselves all the time, and to really find out what it is that makes us tick and how we are discovering ourselves.
Est became hugely successful. Singers, film stars, and hundreds of thousands of ordinary Americans underwent the training in the 1970s. But in the process, the political idea that had begun the movement for personal transformation began to disappear. The original vision had been that through discovering and expressing the self, a new culture would be born, one that would challenge the power of the state.
We will not let them separate our culture from our politics. We are a people. We are all together.
But what was now emerging was the idea that people could be happy simply within themselves, and that changing society was irrelevant. One of the proponents of this was Jerry Rubin. In 1968, Rubin, as leader of the Yippies, had led the March on Chicago, but now he had undergone Est training.
I was willing to die, and I had a martyr complex in a sense. I think we all did. And I've given up that ideal of sacrifice. And I'm not as overwhelmingly moved by injustice as I was. And now we reincarnated ourselves from within.
Basically, the politics were lost and totally replaced by this lifestyle, and then the desire to become deeper and deeper into the self. By now, a grandiose sense of the self. And my good friend and one of the original Yippie founders, Jerry Rubin, definitely moved in that direction. And I think he was buying.
Sorry, everyone, I forgot about that scene. Should have gave a disclaimer that was coming. I think there might be one other little partial nudity scene like that. Again, the 60s and 70s were a weird time in psychology.
Beginning to buy into the notion that he could be happy and fully self-developed on his own. Socialism in one person.
Yes. Was he alone in that trajectory?
Although that, of course, is capitalism.
That's the whole joke. I think it's funny. I think it's funny because people spend so much of their life being bedeviled by their past and being locked into their past and being limited by their past. And there's an enormous freedom from that, letting people create themselves.
Est was only the most vivid and intense expression of an idea that was spreading rapidly through all strata of American society. Books and television programs promoted the idea that one's first duty was to be oneself.
Hey everyone.
And those monitoring this shift
were
astonished at the speed with which the idea was spreading.
I guess I can just do that.
In
That could be my
1970,
edit button.
was a small percentage of the total population, maybe 3 to 5%. By 1980, it had spread to the vast majority of the public, up to 80%.
You asked the question, how do you get self-actualized? You take this
Wayne
day
Dyer.
and you say, when I shave every morning, I look in that mirror, I say to myself, I really say this, I say, nobody is going to ruin this day for you, Wayne Dyer, nobody.
That this preoccupation with the self and the inner self traveled and spread throughout the society in the 1970s.
It helped me to stop living in.
Wayne Dyer actually passed away recently. Again, it's like, this is where this is so complicated, because it's like when you have this ability to heal people, there's this tendency to then get like culty with it. And like so many of these individuals went that path. Not, well, Wayne Dyer, I don't know what his story is personally, but he wrote the Erroneous Zone, and like you'll see it when you believe it. He wrote all these like kind of self-help books that like had their place in this history. I kind of forgot that they touched on him.
The past and start building from today and using my experiences in a positive way to be a better person today and tomorrow.
But then the problem comes, well, how do you be self-expressive?
And it was at this point that American capitalism decided it was going to step in and help these new individuals to express themselves, and in the process make a lot of money. The first thing they were going to do was to find a way of getting inside their heads, to discover what these new beings wanted in order to be themselves. This came not from Madison Avenue, but from one of the most powerful scientific research institutes in America. Stanford Research Institute in California worked for corporations and government. It had done much of the early work on computers, and was also working for the Department of Defense on what would become the Star Wars project. In 1978, a group of economists and psychologists at SRI decided to find a way to read, measure, and fulfill the desires of these new unpredictable consumers.
The idea was to create a rigorous tool for measuring a whole range of desires, wishes, values that prior to that time had been kind of overlooked. They say in business, what gets measured gets done. We were basically telling manufacturers, if you're really going to satisfy not just the basic needs, but individuated wants, whims, and desires of more highly developed human beings, you're going to have to segment, you're going to have to individuate.
To do this, SRI turned for help to those who had begun the liberation of the self. In particular, one of the leaders of the human potential movement, a psychologist called Abraham Maslow. Through observing the work at places like Esalen, Maslow had invented a new system of psychological types. He called it the hierarchy of needs, and it described the different emotional stages that people went through as they liberated their feelings. At the top was self-actualization. This was the point at which individuals became completely self-directed and free of society. The team at SRI thought that Maslow's hierarchy might form the basis for a new way to categorize society, not by social class, but by different psychological desires and drives. To test this, they designed a huge questionnaire with hundreds of questions about how people saw themselves, their inner values. The questions were designed to see whether people fitted into Maslow's categories.
We were trying to find out what people really felt like. So we asked these really penetrating questions, and we...
Look at the director of Psychological Values Research Program. Psychological values. What do people actually care about?
Hired a company that administers surveys, to do them. They said they've never seen anything like it. Usually you have to send out a postcard 6 weeks and then another postcard, and then you got to call the people up, to get the return rates up. We had an 86% return, and they only sent out one postcard. People loved filling out this questionnaire. We got several questionnaires back with a note attached saying, do you have any other questionnaires I could fill out? Because we were asking people to think about things that they had never thought about before, and they liked thinking about them.
Like
you know?
what? Like what they felt inside?
Yeah, like what they...
See, this is where it's so complex, because there's aspects of this that I actually really support, right? There's a lot of kernels of good psychology. But then, again, it's like my critique of a lot of the kind of 60s and 70s. There's this like, or not, I shouldn't have said it like that, but a lot of this kind of, everyone's living in this scenario and our therapy is with everybody else in this living scenario, and the therapist and everybody, and they're dancing, and it's like a lot of it's just a lot of questionable ethics. But that doesn't mean that all the therapeutic theory doesn't have value. I think it's another one of these scenarios where there's complexness to it. And I think the value of relationship is super important. Yeah, this whole thing that I'm trying to kind of find a way to articulate is referred to as the human potential movement, right? Maslow, definitely the biggest name.
Felt inside, what motivated them, what was their life about, what was important to them. It was sort of like, wow.
The answers were then analysed by a computer. It revealed that there were underlying patterns in the way people felt about themselves, which fitted Maslow's categories. And at the top of the hierarchy were a large and growing group which cut across all social classes. The SRI team called them the inner directeds. These were people who felt they were not defined by their place in society, but by the choices they made themselves. But what SRI discovered was that these people could be defined by the different patterns of behaviour through which they chose to express themselves. Self-expression was not infinite. It fell into identifiable types. And the SRI team invented a new term for it: lifestyles. They had managed to categorise the new individualism. They called their system Values and Lifestyles, VALS for short.
At the forefront of this change are three new VALS groups we call inner directed. These are people for whom personal satisfaction is more important than status or money. They tend to be self-expressive, complex, and individualistic. Rob is an I am me. I am me's are searching for new values, breaking away from traditions and inventing their own standards. Rob even invented his own name, Rob Noxious. Jody is an experiential. This is a group seeking inner growth through direct experience. Experientials aren't in one place much. This is the try anything once crowd, and all that.
So think of what they're saying here is like, everybody's their own person, but if you tell everyone to go be their own person, you find that actually, well, these people over here are kind of being their own person in a similar way, and these people over here are sort of, so there's actually like types of ways that people be their own person. Self-expression actually fell into pretty identifiable types.
That activity takes goods and services. Their hobbies are hands-on, and their possessions are simple, but not always simply priced.
I'm a bookseller. I sell books. I'm a businessman. That doesn't necessarily mean that I believe in capitalism. It just happens to be what I'm doing now.
SRI created a simplified questionnaire with just 30 key questions. Anyone who answered them could be immediately fitted into a dozen or so of these new groups. It allowed businesses to identify which groups were buying their products, and from that, how the goods could be marketed, so they became powerful emblems of those groups' inner values and lifestyles. It was the beginning of lifestyle marketing.
So it allowed people not just to look at people as demographics, group of age and income and whatever, but to really understand the underlying motivations. I mean, most of marketing was looking at people's actions and trying to figure out what to do. But what we were doing is,
Ooh, look at that. So it was a switch in marketing from focusing on what people do to who people are. It's not like you're not playing soccer at the beach. Well, it's not you like kicking around a ball. It's like the experience. No, it's just like a switch from the behavior to the experience of the behavior. Forget my beach example. That wasn't very good, but like it's a switch from the behavior to the experience of the behavior, the lifestyle of somebody that does that behavior. It's not biking, it's being a cyclist. That's a better example.
we were trying to look more into people's underlying values so that we could predict what is their lifestyle, what kind of house do they live in, what kind of car do they drive. So the corporations were then able to sell things to them by understanding them, by having labels, by knowing what these people look like, where they live, what their lifestyles are.
If a new product expressed a particular group's values, it would be bought by them. This is what made the values and lifestyle system so powerful, its ability to predict what new products self-actualizers would choose. And this power is about to be demonstrated dramatically.
Think about that sentence. What products in it? What type of product would this self-actualizer want? Well, this type of self-actualizers like doing things that are risk-taking. So those self-actualizers probably like zip lining and surfing or whatever. But notice how like even the language, it's like they're literally marketing to the psychological need.
Owls would show it could predict not just the products they would buy, but the politicians they were going to choose to elect.
Here we go.
Ladies and gentlemen, the next president of the United States of America, Ronald Reagan!
Oh, Reagan.
In 1980, Ronald Reagan ran for president.
Okay, so again, tying in everything. So Reagan, so it's gonna go. We're getting towards what time are we at here? 47. So we got about 10 minutes left of this, and then part 4 gets into how this hits politics, and it's going to be looking at him, right? So, well, it's going to start a little bit with, I thought coming out of the plane it was going to be Nixon, but it's going to talk a bit about Nixon, but really about the kind of Reagan to Clinton transition, time-wise. All right, but where this, so think about what was just said in that segue between scenes, though. It's like if they can use this to understand how you're going to buy a product, can they use this to understand how you're going to pick a politician?
He and his advisors were convinced they could win on a program of a new individualism. It would be an attack on 50 years of government interference in people's lives.
I wrote a speech about let the people make the basic decisions, get judges out of the way, get bureaucrats out of the way, get centralized government out of the way. I gave Reagan a choice of several titles for the speech, and the one he picked was let the people rule. Let the people regain rule, regain control over their own destiny away from a remote elite in Washington.
I would like to think that the kind of leadership that I would exercise in Washington is not the kind of leadership that I would pretend that I can solve all the problems I've been discussing here, but that together, you and I can. I would like to take the lead in taking government off the backs of the American people and turning you loose to do what I know you can do.
It was radical. Moderate Republicans thought it was suicide. Jimmy Carter called it ridiculous. The press was extremely negative. But the odd thing is that it polled very well in New Hampshire, which was the first primary state, the state that we had to win.
What was odd was that there seemed to be a strange mosaic of support for Reagan's policies. The traditional pollsters could see no coherent pattern across class, age, or gender. But those who...
People forget, too, that Reagan was like I was going to say hardcore popular. I should pick a better way of saying that. He was like just super well known. He was not a populist, but he was a populist is like kind of a very specific word, but he was just a very popular person.
Who had designed the values and lifestyle system believed that they knew why. They were testing their system in both America and Britain, and they were convinced that both Reagan's and Mrs. Thatcher's message about individual freedom would appeal to the group at the top of their hierarchy.
So you got Ronald Reagan in the States, and then you got Margaret Thatcher in England, similar kind of politics. This is like 80s.
The inner directives, because it fitted with the way they saw themselves.
They were really concerned about being individuals, being individualistic. And so in the early stages, when we were looking at the messages that both Thatcher and then Reagan were putting across, we said they are using words that will really appeal to a lot of the younger people, and particularly to the people who are moving towards self-actualization. We call them the inner-directed people. A lot of our colleagues said, that's absolutely ridiculous, because inner-directeds are very socially aware, very socially concerned. They'll never vote Conservative, or they'll never vote for the Republicans. But we said...
On here, I thought they were saying... So it's interesting because I play words, because she said inner-directed. So that they're inner-directed. But then inner directives would mean that there's directives, forces within you that are, it's kind of I guess it's just it's a very similar, it's the same word basically, same concept. Anywho, this is the correct term. Sorry that I had it a little bit wrong.
If Thatcher and Reagan continue to appeal to them in this way, they really will.
And I vision leadership in taking government off your backs and turning you loose to do what you can do so well. Thank you very much.
The idea that the new self-actualizing individuals would choose a politician from the right, not the left, seemed extraordinary. But to test their prediction, the Values and Lifestyles team did a survey of voting intentions, and they correlated it with their new psychological categories.
When we said in our surveys, who are you going to vote for? Sure enough, it was the inner directives who said that they would vote for Thatcher and for Reagan. And they made the difference in those elections because of their voting for Thatcher and Reagan. And it really surprised our colleagues, even within my own organization. It really showed the power of this approach, because it's very difficult to identify inner directives on the street. These people who voted for Thatcher and Reagan, these inner directives, came from any walk of life.
See, it's weird because she's using it as a noun, right? As a label.
It's really hardly correlated with social class at all. I mean, if you just go along and look at age, sex, social class, you would never pick them up. But if you really go along with a questionnaire that gets at their values, then you can identify them very easily.
And that was new?
And that was completely new, yeah.
At the beginning of 1981, Ronald Reagan was inaugurated as president. But he took charge of a country that was facing economic disaster. The terrible inflation of the 1970s had destroyed much of America's traditional heavy industries, and millions were unemployed. But true to his campaign promises, Reagan told the country he would not step in to help, as all previous governments had since the war.
These United States are confronted with an economic affliction of great proportions. We suffer from the longest and one of the worst sustained inflations in our national history. Idle industries have cast workers into unemployment, human misery, and personal indignity. In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
But America's ailing economy was about to be rescued, not by government, but by the new groups that the market researchers had identified, the self-actualizing individuals. They were about to become the motor for what would be called the new economy.
You can be what you want to be.
So regarding V8, what do you really want?
A tasty product that's good for me.
What do you want that for?
One technique is that we ask people the same question over and over and over again, and we say, what do you want? What do you really want? What do you want that for? And they start to talk about it, and they kind of get intimate with what's going on. What we're doing with that technique is unpeeling the onion. If you want to think of a person kind of having layers and layers and layers of protection and thoughts and behaviors.
People are like onions. you know? Sorry, I watch a lot of kid movies with Evie. It's hard not to make a Shrek reference.
And
there.
believe we want to get to that center core.
In the wake of the invention of values and lifestyles, a vast industry of psychological market research grew up. And the old technique of the focus group, invented by the Freudian psychoanalysts in the 50s, was used in a new and powerful way. The original aim of the focus group had been to find ways to entice people to buy a limited range of mass-produced goods. But now focus groups were used in a different way to explore the inner feelings of lifestyle groups, and out of that invent whole new ranges of products, which would allow those groups to express what they felt was their individuality. And the generation who had once rebelled against the conformity imposed by consumerism now embraced it, because it helped them to be themselves.
What capitalism managed to do that was brilliant was to actually create products that people like me would be interested in, that people like Jerry Rubin would be interested in. Capitalism developed a whole industry at developing products that evoked a larger sense of self, that seemed to agree with us that the self was infinite, that you could be anything you wanted to be, that took our philosophy and agreed with it, and then created products that supposedly helped you, aids, that helped you be this limitless self. The product sells you a way of life, a way of being. The product sells you values. You dress this way, you live in a house like this, you have furniture like this, you use this computer.
Do you have the regular jeans?
Computer.
Oh, Gloria Vanderbilt has a lot in denim and silks.
Right, this is just about the time of the huge push of personal computing, right? Everyone's about to get computers in the house. Like well, that's coming like late 90s, but like this whole computer tech piece is going to be a big part in part 4.
And in cotton.
You eat in these restaurants, there are values there, hipness, coolness.
This is not, I repeat, not a marketing scheme.
So the notion that you could buy an identity replaced the original movement notion that you were perfectly free to create an identity. And you were perfectly free to change the world and make the world anything you wanted it to be.
Well, what I wear is a statement.
And this vast range of new desires fitted perfectly with changes in industrial production. Computers now allowed manufacturers to economically produce short runs of consumer goods. The old restrictions of mass production disappeared, as did the worry that had bedeviled corporate America ever since mass production had been invented, that they would produce too many goods. With the new self, consumer desire seemed to have no limit.
In the United States, the concern of companies was always that supply would outstrip demand, that we were producing too much, and that there was not a market for it. You don't hear that kind of talk anymore, because you've gone from a conception of a market of limited needs, and if you fill them, they're filled, to a market of unlimited, ever-changing needs dominated by self-expressiveness that products and services can satisfy in an endless variety of ways, and ways that change all the time. And consequently, economies have unlimited horizons.
Out of this explosion of desire came what seemed a never-ending consumer boom that regenerated the American economy. The original idea had been that the liberation of the self would create new kinds of people, free of social constraint. That radical change had happened, but while the new beings felt liberated, they had become increasingly dependent for their identity on business. The corporations had realized that it was in their interests to encourage people to feel that they were unique individuals and then offer them ways to express that individuality. A world in which people felt they were rebelling against conformity was not a threat to business, but its greatest opportunity.
It was, in a sense, the triumph of the self. It was the triumph of a certain self-indulgence, a view that everything in the world and all moral judgment was appropriately viewed through the lens of personal satisfaction. Indeed, the ultimate ending point of that logic is that there is no society. There is only a bunch of individual people making individual choices to promote their own individual well-being.
Next week's episode tells the story of how politicians on the left, in both Britain and America, turned to the techniques developed by business in order to regain power. But what they didn't realize is that what had worked for business would undermine the very basis of their political beliefs. They would find themselves trapped by the greedy desires of the new self.
Bill Clinton. Yep. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one. Oops, wrong one.